So, I don't live in a big city. I live in a nice little town. It's got a population of about 30,000 people. It's a very nice town. I live in a particularly nice area of the town. Like many places, there are a few bad parts of the town, but like generally speaking, it's a really nice place to live. It's not a like I said, it's not a big city. It's a town, so we don't have a particularly high crime rate. So, like when I was sitting on my doorstep this afternoon, I was like, "Oh, that's a lot of sirens going off," and then the next thing I know is that I can hear like how do you even talk about it? Like it's such a bizarre thing to happen. This was like 100 yards from my front door. I mean, if you want to get really, really technical about it, it was 108 yards, but I actually measured it in feet on Google Maps and translated it for you. Aren't you? Aren't you lucky? Yeah. So, what happened was, at least according to witnesses who were there, who I spoke to. So apparently, there was a guy who was like on drugs, probably heroin, and he'd sort of like wandered into the road and nearly got hit by a car. So the car pulled over, like a good citizen would, and like the driver got out the car, presumably to see if the pedestrian was all right, and then the two men got into an argument, and the guy who was not driving, the man on drugs, pulled a knife and started stabbing this guy, whose name I know, but I'm not going to be repeating it because it's not been officially released in any kind of press report. So, like, I happen to know because this is a small town, and the man who was killed, it was a friend of my neighbour, like someone who lives next door but one to me. So it's a small town, everyone sort of knows everyone, even if it's friend of a friend. So yeah, so the drugged up guy started stabbing this man, whose 3 children were in his car, one of whom was a baby, and I believe I was told that another one was maybe 6 or 7, and then I think the eldest was maybe 8 or 9. So these children, the 3 in all, watched as their father got stabbed to death. There was, on the scene, there was 10 emergency response vehicles, not including helicopters. That was a mix of ambulances and police vehicles. And they had the police dogs out. The Northeast Air Ambulance had landed, which is a helicopter, to take the man to hospital, but they were performing CPR on him in the road, and they transferred him into an ambulance, and he never got out the ambulance. So the air ambulance left because it's an expensive thing to run, and they weren't going to be transporting him to the hospital. but the police helicopter was like still flying around and looking for the guy. They apparently found the guy fairly quickly. They had a good description of him. There was eyewitnesses. This happened at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Like the ice cream man like had pulled into my street as like this was as like all of the police were arriving. You know, like there was a lot of people around. It's a pretty busy junction. And yeah, so they went on a hunt for the murderer and found him like maybe 400 feet away. He was queuing up in Asda to get into Asda, the supermarket. Because the social distancing and everything, Asda being like socially responsible, they're only letting so many people in at a time. Everyone's like 2 meters apart. And a friend of mine was in the queue, having a fag, waiting to go in Asda. And she was stood maybe 2 or 3 people ahead of him in the queue when the police came around and saw him and arrested him because they had a description or they knew what he looked like. So like he was hiding in plain sight, which like is actually surprisingly clever. He was just queuing up to go in Asda. Presumably, if he'd have gone in, he was going to like ditch the knife in Asda. He had the knife on him. The murder weapon was apparently in his trousers, in like a paper bag or something. So they have apparently, like, you know, caught the guy, but it was on our local news. Like, you know, you have like a local newspaper. Our local newspaper's website said no arrests had been made yet, so I don't know if he's like been formally charged. Apparently there was another witness, a man who'd got off a bus. Don't know how he was involved, but the police are looking for him. But yeah, this was like 100 yards from my front door. I often sit outside my front door because if I sit in my garden, my cats sort of paw at the window and they can't see me if I'm sitting out the front. So like I sit out the front and then I don't get bothered by cats. And I was like sitting there doing what I normally do, and I could like see the police vans because they were 100 yards away. And like I went a bit closer to see what was going on, find out from like neighbours what people had heard and what had happened. And so like when I first got there, I don't think he died yet, the man, but he did, and it's so sad. And the fact that it happened to him in front of his children, it's just awful. Like, these things do not happen in my community. Like, everyone who I've spoke to about it, like friends, relatives, everyone's just really shocked because it's like, it's not like we live in London. We live in the northeast. It's like, we live in a nice place, and there's not really like gang violence here, and it's not a place where murders happen. And this happened on my doorstep. So it has been a bit of a weird day, to put it mildly. Like, I totally was gonna try and be productive today and film something, but that went out the window because I mean the sirens and the helicopter was so loud. But also just like when my poor neighbour got home and he was telling me that it was his friend who'd been killed, he was just devastated. Devastated. So, like, I'll update yous if anyone's interested on, like, what happens with it going forward, but it's so bizarre. It's such a weird thing to happen. It's awful. It's a tragedy. So, yeah. Thoughts are with his family, because, God, can you imagine? Can you imagine? You're leaving your house, you go to the shop, and that happens. Just as if we don't have enough going on with everything, that's going to happen.